Namaste, viewers, and welcome to this special podcast on America's 250th anniversary, the celebration of its birthday, and America's Independence Day, July the 4th. As you all know, it's a holiday here, and all over the country in the United States, there are many different forms of celebration. There are articles being written. People are thinking about this. They are talking about the American Revolution, which I hope we talk about. They're talking about the Constitution. They're talking about American exceptionalism all over again. So, these discussions are happening in various forms and in various forums. It's happening in the media. People are writing articles, books are coming out. But I don't know what you think, Dr. Singh, but I think we have a unique perspective because we are talking about the amazing Vedas. Now, we're going to the oldest, as it were, scriptures of humanity. We are gleaning, insights from there. And I think that there's so much that we can learn from those fundamental ideas in the Vedas, including, the whole idea of lighting your fire from inside, or, chasing that higher consciousness, the light of higher consciousness, which, in a sense, we find, at the very foundational moment, the founding moment of the United States in 1775. So if you go back then, I think they lit a pretty big fire, and and so to speak, talking about India. Remember the Boston Tea Party? The tea came from India, friends. Don't forget that very basic Indian connection going, right back. Of course, it was all about taxation without representations. But I hand it to you, Dr. Singh. Let's go back to that founding moment.
Yeah, and I often wonder about that. Remember, they had nothing but a dream. I mean, they didn't know if they would survive. They were taking on the biggest empire in the world, which was brutal, and they knew they not only would destroy their properties, their families, the nation, but also go after them personally, which the British did. And so, despite all those fears and dangers, they took it on. That I can understand. But what I would like to ask you is there something else there? I mean, why is the American Revolution important? Is it important? Or has it been kind of, clouded over by more modern things? And I'd love to hear your thought on its significance and what's the big deal?
Yes, yes. I think this is a very crucial question, especially, when we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of that moment. See, first of all, the Declaration of Independence itself is an extraordinary document.
Yes.
And, we talked about the drashtas, rishis as mantra drashtas. But, the American founders were also visionaries. We talked about that. But they also articulated
Yes.
their vision in very special words. The words were special. And, they were deists. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The deists were people who were a special kind of Christian. I mean, they were not doctrinaire, they were not dogmatic. And they had a very open idea of the divine, almost like a Vedic idea. It wasn't the Jehovah of the Old Testament. It wasn't even, the Jesus that the evangelists or others are talking about, whether it's the other denominations, but they had a very impersonal, almost like Brahman, all pervading idea of the deity, who was obviously benevolent, and they were rationalists by and large. So they were very special people. And among the founders, Adams, he was a big Indophile. He had read everything that was written about India. And of course, British imperialism in India had reached a critical juncture. 1775. We have to remember, Battle of Plassey had already happened, which means Palashi. Old Bengal presidency was being formed. It's today in Bihar. But Clive defeated Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the Nawab of Bengal, you see, who had a huge army, maybe 100,000 soldiers, elephants. And Clive led 5,000 people, sepoys they were called. Of course, there were a few Britishers there, maybe 100, 200. But it's a puzzle of history how such a small force defeated such a large army. So obviously, that's something we can talk about a little later. But obviously, you know, a new technology of warfare, a new approach, modernity, if you want to call it, was, entering the subcontinent at that time. And somewhere else, the Marathas, the big power in India at that time, who had gained an ascendancy over the Mughals, they were like defeated by Ahmad Shah Abdali, another raider coming down the Khyber Pass, looting the country, devastating it. That was 1765. You know, here, 1757, something else was happening in eastern India, far away from those raiders. And then 1764, Battle of Buxar, British got the Diwani of Bengal. That means they got the purse strings. So British power was rising in India, and something entirely different was happening in the United States. And so, I mean, the Indian connection is so important. It hasn't been fully explored, in my opinion. I mentioned the Tea
Yes.
Party. I mentioned Adams, one of the founders, who had read so much about India. And information was circulating, percolating, if you like. And the Americans were very open. And right up to the Second World War, when Roosevelt made it a condition to help Churchill, he said, "You must free India," because Churchill was a hard-nosed imperialist who cared very little about us brown-skinned people and didn't care that so many people died in the Bengal famine. So Americans stood for some values which included liberty. Of course, there was slavery. We'll talk about that. But the thing I wanted to say, and I'm going back to a very important point you mentioned, it was so much touch and go. You know, the revolutionaries or the insurrectionists, as they were called, uh, in fact, just a few months before the war actually broke out, the War of Independence, Washington, who was this great man himself, said that we all, that is, Americans, the 13 colonies, we wish for peace and we want amicable relations with the mother country. They were not looking for war, but somehow that's what I'm trying to say, that new research has come to light, which also humanizes George III. And, just think about it, Dr. Singh, that, they had kept all these papers, his letters, under lock and key in the Tower of London or in Windsor Castle or wherever. They've just been opened up. So they are opening things up after such a long time, after almost turning themselves to become satellites of America. But be that as it may, I think it was Queen Elizabeth II who released some of these papers. And American historians, I'm looking at the work of Rick Atkinson. It's a great trilogy. He's written on the American Revolution. And there was a recent, more popular podcast on this from the Hoover Foundation. And there's so much to learn. So, how did the Americans win the war? It was so much touch and go, it was so chancy. So sometimes you wonder if there is actually an intervention, the hand of God, that somehow, and the American pioneers felt that way. They were going to starve to death, but some Indians, Native Americans who were called Indians, helped them out, gave them corn, taught them how to cultivate corn. They ate turkey. That's why we celebrate Thanksgiving today. And something very interesting was happening. I call the American Revolution a world event. You ask me why. I'm going to give you several reasons. One reason is that the French Revolution would not have been possible without the American Revolution. Remember, it happened in 1794. This was 1775. So this was the first revolution. That came later. Of course, there was a revolution in England. Don't forget, William Cromwell. I keep believing that most things start in England, but then they dialed back. They couldn't handle. They couldn't handle the death of the monarchy. King Charles was beheaded, but then King Charles II was brought back from France. They reinstated the monarchy, though with much reduced powers. So the revolution failed, as it were, and there was a compromise. Similarly, you can argue the French Revolution failed. Napoleon came afterwards. There was a monarchy. There were so many republics. They slaughtered the aristocrats. So many terrible things happened. They invented the guillotine. Now, America didn't do all of that. It's that one revolution is still sustained. So why am I saying it's a worldwide event? Because, what happened? The French funded the American Revolution. And we are going to talk a little bit about war in a moment because people talk about war, they don't talk about who funds wars. And the British in India won because they were funded by the Indian moneylenders, including Jagat Seth. So, who funded the British? Sorry, who funded the American revolutionaries? The enemies of the British, who were the French. And remember, the French were also fighting in America, North America, in Quebec, in Louisiana. They owned a chunk of land. So the Anglo French rivalry of Europe was played out not only in America, but in India, the Carnatic Wars. So that's why I'm saying we have to see this in a wider context. And the contingencies are so interesting. So basically, the British, you said they were an overwhelming power. Absolutely. I mean, they were not yet the number one undisputed colonial power in the world, but they were close. They had already defeated the Spanish. They had beaten back the Spanish Armada, right? But the French were still very important rivals to them.
Yes.
And because the French, as it were fighting the British, they supported the American revolutionaries and gave them money and ammunition and helped to blockade, on land, the supply chains of the British. So the British could only,
Yes.
replenish through the sea. So you see, if the French had not helped the American revolutionaries, maybe the war would have gone in another direction. So
Yes.
many contingency. So why I said it's a worldwide event, the French got involved, and don't forget the Spanish also got involved. Now, Dr. Singh, we are in Florida, and I know you're going to ask me this, so I'm going to anticipate the question. Where was Florida in the War of American Independence? And I can tell you, Florida, which had been ceded by the Spanish, was still a British territory, which, by the way, when the British lost, they gave back to Spain, and then it joined America much later in 1845. So it's a very interesting history. But Florida remained a British territory, and all the whatever wounded British soldiers, people who did not like the revolutionaries, they were loyalists also. So America already had a civil war during the Revolutionary War. A lot of the people in the South didn't want to secede from the crown. So the North-South divide was still there. So that's what I'm saying. It's a worldwide event. So the Spanish Empire was involved, and Florida was a British territory at that time. And then, as I said, why is it worldwide? The French were involved, the British were involved, the Spanish were involved, and in an indirect way, the India whole connection with the Indian subcontinent, as you know, was very closely connected with the American Revolution. So that's why I think it was important for the whole world at that time.
Yes. No, absolutely. I agree with you. I think that's you shed a very important light on this, and I think to see it in the perspective after 250 years, the impact on the globe, and obviously we see the impact. The American culture is probably the predominant culture. The soft power, America is not just hard power. The soft power of America is almost like the Brahman. It's all pervasive, in our world. I mean, I studied in a school. I was taught by American Jesuits, and so that's why all these. When coming to America, it wasn't like I was coming to a different culture. It was, we already knew we knew the movies, we knew the slang, we spoke, we could speak English. They'd beaten us up, they'd caned us into speaking English, and we had the American mindset in some ways. The American priests, they made us play baseball. We didn't play American football. They made us, of course, cricket we had to have, but soccer, but baseball was big, and they made us the athletics and the sciences, humanities, education. They were very strong on education, and that yes, they did not teach us the Veda. Veda we have to learn ourselves, but no one can teach you the Veda. You have to learn. You have to want to do it.
In fact, I mean, now you are sending me down the memory lane because I very much remember the bicentennial. Okay, America's bicentennial. Well, I mean, 200 years. That is 1975. I was a boy. I was in school or just getting out of school. And I remember it very clearly for two reasons, Dr. Singh. One is, of course, that there was the emergency in India, you see, and we had been clamping down, and a lot of things were,
Yes,
people were afraid. 1975, I remember it very clearly, very, very. I had an emergency diary. And
yes,
then, there was a family friend who had studied in America, and somehow he felt, and my brother was already in an IIT by then, IIT Bombay. So he was bringing me, or he just went there in 75, 76, around that time. And he was giving me all this information which he was getting from IIT Bombay. And people were like Nandan Nilekani, a lot of the leaders of today, IT revolution, were in IITs, and they were learning from America.
yes.
And I mean, I was amazed when I went to the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. It was a big technological school. It was right up there. And John Bardeen, he invented the transistor, got a Nobel Prize for it, which was the foundation for this whole revolution in computing. But leave that as it may. I mean, 1975, I remember because of the fall of Saigon. So what I want to say is that this friend of the family, he got, he saw me, he found me to be a person with many interests but no direction. So he told my dad, I'm going to give your son a gift on his birthday. And I was so looking forward to it. I thought it would be some scooter or something like that, which young people like. But he gave me a subscription to the Time magazine, and it opened my eyes. I was only 14, 15, and I started reading about the world. But I want to say that it was the fall of Saigon. And it was
Yes,
crazy because I was listening to it on Voice of America, and I realized that they were saying they were winning and the next day they were vacating. So I began to suspect propaganda. And later on, I realized that Voice of America is not available for Americans, it's only for outsiders. So, the Cold War, the world not being what we think it is, but also, as I said, being exposed to fundamental ideas about America, which only started making sense to me later when I actually came here to study. But the one of the things that struck me about the American Revolution, it seems to me, which is so important, that in my school, I remember we used to study British Indian history, right? And we were in a British type of school, and we used to study it governor general by governor general, which is absurd because it's like studying it from their point of view. So that's how I still remember all these dates. Clive, Warren Hastings, Sir William Jones. You can ask me the dates, I remember them because that's how we studied them.
That's how we study.
And then when the exam came, they never asked in that fashion. And I did so poorly in my 10th standard, though I was the one of the better read in the class because our school was anyhow. But the point I'm making is that one of the great so-called great governor generals of India about whom we studied was Lord Cornwallis, you see. And then it took me a while to figure out that Cornwallis was the man that Washington defeated in the decisive Battle of Yorkshire. It was the turning point of the war. Okay. And this Cornwallis, of course, I mean, he learned things right from this war and he applied those skills in India. And it was Cornwallis who defeated Tipu Sultan in 1790s. So in 1780s, he loses in America. He's sent back to England. From England, he comes to India as the Governor General. And he's also famous for his reforms and the permanent settlement that came a little later with William Bentinck. But what I'm trying to say is all of these issues are deeply related. And what he learned there, he applied here to India. He defeated. So they lost one empire, they gained another one. And you're absolutely right when you said that all those who had participated in the revolution, the British did their best to destroy them in every which way possible. Many got paupered, they lost their lands. So it was a very vindictive power. And yet, maybe the moment had come. That's why I said maybe circumstances conspired, maybe there was a deeper purpose, which is what we want to look at. That in terms of human evolution, the evolution of consciousness, right? In terms of the forces that are at play, even today, what was the contribution of America? And to answer that question, I believe it unleashed a force in the world, and that force is very important. It's not just the force of individualism, of that pioneering spirit, risk taking, innovation, but also the force of liberty, also the force of justice. You see, people want to fight for justice, to sacrifice for it, to be brave. This is like a Kshatriya country for me.
Yes,
They
yes,
are like the ancient, these Vedic people we see. They are fighters. They fight
yes,
for what they
yes,
believe.
yes,
They're not cowards, so they go to different theaters of the world. Now, here's the point. I want to ask you this question. Remember, we talked about Vritra and how he tried to, get hold of the waters and try to capture the rays of the sun, I mean, the cows. Now, look at the Strait of Hormuz. There are people who want to extract a tribute, a toll, when you pass through international waters. And I want to ask you this. See, one of the first people that the Americans took on when they became independent were these slavers and pirates of Barbary, okay? So they used to harass all these ships that were in the free waters, and they used to enslave these people. So, what we call today Crimea, all these people, I mean, all these places, sorry, were slave entrepôts, and more than 1 million whites was enslaved and sold through Turkey and through the Middle East. And so there was a terrible human trafficking that was going on through these free agents who used to, and that's why they are called the Slavs, from which we get the word slave, as opposed to the Franks. The Franks were the free, the Slavs were the slaves. So there's this whole history that we don't look at. And Jefferson is writing back, and Benjamin Franklin, who was posted as US ambassador to France, he's writing back, and these early American generals just out making trade deals, and some of their people were captured and were held for ransom. So they met these people, the Barbary pirates and their kingdoms. Today we have Somali pirates, we have all kinds of pirates. The Houthis are bombing you for doing things, etc. So they said, what have you got against us? Because we never fight those. We don't have a border with you. We don't have any quarrel with you. Why? So they are quoting the book, the sacred scripture, saying, look, you guys are unbelievers, and it's our job to take tribute from you, to enslave you. We are extracting jizya. We're extracting this tax from you.
yes,
We tax you. And believe it or not, one of the first wars that America fought overseas was against these pirates. And, no guesses for predicting who won. The Americans beat the hell out of these guys. They applied the technology they had, they got the cannons, they did what they had to. So, this American pragmatism, this is what distinguishes it from most other countries. Get the job done, find a problem, solve it. Don't embroider the problem. And coming to today's world is very volatile. But if you look at the Declaration of Independence, you look at the founding fathers of America, they were not dogmatic. Though, early Puritans, that was before the Declaration of Independence, witch burning, a lot of bad things happened. But the American way was you just go further away, like the Quakers, they went farther away, like Benjamin Franklin was a Quaker. They created a state, Pennsylvania, because the Puritans of New England didn't like them and were preaching fire and brimstone. The believers will go to heaven, the unbelievers will go to hell. But religious freedom is still guaranteed. So, some amazing things happened in America
yes,
which are important to the world, that many different opinions should flourish and compete. And you can't, control from top and say my way or the highway.
yes,
So this pluralism, this freedom of speech and expression as opposed to dogmatism, and Europe was very dogmatic. 100 years war, 20 years war, wars between Catholics and Protestants, slaughter of innocents. And America hasn't had a religious war in its boundaries because of religious freedom. And even today, we are being menaced by, fanatics, as it were. And I wanted to end by asking you about the contemporary situation. And do you think there's a parallel, the Straits of Hormuz being, locked up, like the Vritras wanting to lock up things? Of course, it's not water but oil.
So, you pointed out the issues and the human tendencies of obstructionism, tendency of underhandedness are there, and they have been there in the U.S. too. And early on, as we see great people founding this country, we also saw some evil people trying to take advantage of it and manipulate the system. I mean, Alexander Hamilton, as you know, was shot by the vice president, who was himself not a true Democrat, so he tried to usurp Jefferson. So all these things are there, but fundamentally, it's, as Reagan said, Ronald Reagan, it's the shining city on the hill. We still can look up. It's kind of a lighthouse. It has been a lighthouse, and we hope it continues. We will do all our best to help it. And yes, these are flaws of human behavior, human nature, but then that's where we can bring in our knowledge of how to transcend the limitations in a way, as I think you'll talk about Sri Aurobindo's approach, bringing the East and the West together and see. I think that is the future. I think that should be our aspiration. Neither the West, what was that, Rudyard Kipling, the East and West shall meet. They shall meet, and
No.
never the twain shall meet.
Yeah, and never the twain shall meet.
Yes,
So we
yes,
don't agree with that.
but we're gonna bring it. We are living that. We are embodying it.
That's
So
it. That's it.
that is the.
So that's beautifully put. We are living this synthesis, if you call it, the ideal of human unity, to use another title of Sri Aurobindo, or the human cycle, where human societies, which are still evolving, no nation is perfect. Let's face it.
Yes.
No human system is perfect. We are not raising one and lowering the other, nor are we targeting anybody. They are at a certain stage of evolution where they think that those who disagree with them have no right to live, or should be whatever, attacked, or controlled. And there are systems of such tight control. I can say that there's a very important hyperpower in the world, and a two-seater plane crashed into their tallest building, and the first thing they did is they blanked out all the news. But some people had taken photos, so you can keep trying to control, and everyone is saying, oh, they'll overtake, they'll do this. But if there's no freedom of thought, if people are not allowed to exchange, so it's a different matter. But I'm saying the struggle is still going on between those who want to control everything, who want to sit on top and direct everybody else, control, as it were, versus openness. Maybe let's end this second episode on that, and then let's see if never the twain shall meet. We'll talk about it in the next episode. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for your words of wisdom. And this is a wisdom series. We are interested not just in politics, polemics, geostrategic things. We are interested in consciousness. So we request you to join us. Why request you? We invite you. And we thank you for viewing this podcast. Share it, subscribe to it. Check us out on Amazing Vedas on X, and you'll hear more from us in the coming weeks. And we hope to be on other media as well. But see you soon, and thank you so much. Namaste.